Welcome to Integrative Lawyers of the World. It's time for a new way of practicing law, a way that honors our interconnectedness, that values what is really important, our core values: generosity, integrity, authenticity. If you agree, you are not alone. There is a global integrative law movement that is transformational, impactful, fun. It's time to grow because the world needs us. So we are interviewing lawyers from around the world who share their experiences as an integrative lawyer. One by one and together, we can and we are making a positive impact. Hi, I'm Carrie Raleigh, and I'm the host of this show. I am so glad you joined us today. Our guest this episode, Dr. Amar Dhall, is from Canberra, Australia. Dr. Dhall draws upon his legal education, his PhD research, and his wide range of knowledge and experience to help others unlock and embody their genius. In our conversation, we talked about trauma, what it is, what it looks like, how it shows up in our lives, and why it's important to train lawyers on becoming trauma-informed and trauma-wise, a project that he is working on right now. We also talked about meaning and purpose versus money and happiness as measures of one's life. And so much more, from quantum mechanics to having boundaries to power and humanity. And he shares what it means to him to be an integrative lawyer and the impact that that has had on him and his profession. I hope you find this conversation as interesting as I did. You can find out more information on Dr. Dhall on his website at amardhall.com. That's AMARDHALL.com. Or you can connect with him on LinkedIn. Let him know you heard his conversation here. And for other conversations with other lawyers from around the world, please check out Integrative Lawyers of the World on YouTube and on Facebook and other social media. Thank you and enjoy our conversation. So if we can get started, can you give us a little bit of a background of your experience? I know you are a lawyer, an academic, a doctor, you have your doctorate, you are advocacy, you have quite a bit of experience and skills and titles behind your name.
Yeah, thank you. It took me a while, I guess, to find my real place of resonance. And I think this is kind of maybe a product of being going through a Western education, where it's looking to understand things through reductionism. You know, what's the problem with this, or why is this like that? And so I kind of have followed a path. So I did my undergraduate law degree, and for my honors, I wrote a thesis on looking at holistic quantum mechanics, human consciousness, and a theory of law. And so I did that for my honors, and then that rolled into my PhD, which I wrote, and it took me far too long to do that. That was a good 10 years, almost 10-year stint of getting that together and marked and so on. During that time, I was teaching at the University of Canberra in their School of Law. And after that, I had a very brief stint in private practice with a small firm, was offered partnership, and realized that I really didn't want that at all. And so then began looking at what else was out there, and found my way to training as a therapist and counselor. Now I'm specializing in trauma, and kind of inhabit this, a fairly liminal space. At the moment, I'm working with two other people in the States to put together the Lawyers Center for Performance and Wellbeing, where we're looking at both training lawyers to be trauma informed, but also making them aware of the trauma they carry as human beings, and how that shapes both the profession as well as them individually. Yeah.
Very interesting. There's so much there that I want to talk about. I'm going to start with one of the last things first, and then I may work my way backwards, and we just may go all over the place a bit. I'm interested in training the lawyers for trauma. I don't actively practice law that much anymore. I keep my law license active. So I may
do the occasional work. And just a friend recently contacted me with, can I help this person? He is a U.S. veteran, a soldier who has PTSD, and he's dealing with a credit issue. A debt collector's collecting him, and apparently this is triggering him. And so when she referred it to me, she said, this whole process is very triggering to him with his PTSD. And so I'm just at the beginning phases of it. And so do you have, so there's trauma in there with him, and any suggestions, or I just, the timing of this, my video with you, the email from her, there's got to be somewhere in the timing of this of why we're speaking right now for me to maybe help this person.
Yeah, well, so this, PTSD, firstly, I have a huge problem with the name PTSD. It's not disordered at all. It's actually what would be disordered if someone experiences trauma and doesn't develop the kinds of symptoms that people do. So I think it's important to understand that these people have healthy human beings that have undergone an experience that has impacted their nervous system. And it's the process for them is decoupling their nervous system from the events and triggers that they have. So, what you've said is really quite broad as well. Being trauma informed, which is kind of the base level for lawyers. I've got a paper which I'd written for the American Bar Association through Kim. And that was where I talked about the higher standard being trauma wise and understanding, how prevalent trauma is and looking at one's own trauma. So to return to your client, I'd really need to have more information to really give you meaningful advice how you work with them. There's simple things, too much information can be overwhelming just as much as too little information can be overwhelming. I think taking people where they're at and being patient and slow. I think also one of the differences between being a trauma specialist and being trauma informed is generally trauma informed teaches people the basics on how do I kind of navigate someone who may have a trauma response and keep away from trauma. Do what I can to keep them away from what triggers them. Okay. And that's to an extent being trauma informed. But really where healing happens for these people is actually going into it with a specialist. So I think one thing that could be really useful is perhaps to, and I say this to my clients, is I think success in life doesn't come from an individual standing alone and being brilliant. It's a web of support and love that's around them. So I think, if you have the relationship with the client to really support them to create a web of which you're a part, and then perhaps there's maybe another professional or two that either interface subject to the bounds of privacy of information, but to support this person to navigate both whatever needs to be gone through, and then not have a compounding effect of the process of resolving this issue as well on the trauma. So someone comes in with PTSD, then the actual navigating the process of resolving what you're talking about can compound the trauma.
Yeah.
So I think creating space for that to be metabolized in real time is kind and perhaps maybe a little bit outside the purview of, I'm talking to you in the context of integrative lawyers who maybe understand a whole person is involved. But I think also in that is recognizing that to support a whole person is bigger than a one-person job as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And is that part of the reason, or let me just ask it this way, why do you think it's important to give lawyers training on dealing with trauma, or in establishing, is it a project, or what is it that you're exactly establishing?
So we're establishing a center based in the States. Yes, the Lawyers Center for Performance and Wellbeing. Recognizing, we elected not to put trauma in the title of it because that can be a bit loaded. And I think for people who understand trauma deeply, it's it's not a scary term, but for I think many ordinary people, it can be a term that's a bit intimidating. But the essence of it, well, it's twofold really. One is, so the practice of law is affects the society and the people whom lawyers serve with as much grace and dignity and empowerment as possible. So I think that's one part of it. The other part of it is, I think there's generally lawyers have quite low emotional intelligence. I think the statistics are 10 to 15% higher IQ and 20 to 30% lower EQ than
Really?
average. Yeah. So, and I think for me the metaphor that's evoked is the image of the blindfolded Lady Justice, saying that we should be impartial. And one of the things that's taught at law school is that emotion is the death of reason in legal thinking. And I mean, that to me is absurd. It's not possible to separate our emotions. Secondly, I think there's hubris to think that if we were to take out one of the key aspects of what makes us human, that it would enhance our capacity to produce just outcomes or create a meaningful life. So, and symbolized again in the lady being blindfolded and thinking, but without seeing that there's going to be a better outcome.
Yeah.
So I think, these sorts of things live in the practice at a cultural level and at a training level. So I think the reason why I'm saying this is, as I said, the first reason or the first part was the people who come to law to actually get the protection of it or seek protection or need to go through legal process because they've committed a wrong of some kind. They may have trauma before, trauma during, and then trauma after their time with the legal system. And I think lawyers, as a function of their low EQ, will have trauma that they've brought in. They're often high achievers and prone to overwork. The management styles in law firms is what are called emotionally dissonant leadership styles. Yeah, so tending to be command and control or pace setting. And in emotional intelligence literature and leadership literature, these are dissonant styles that lead to burnout and the destruction of morale in an organization. So I think really the role of exploring trauma for lawyers is at all of these levels, owning trauma in themselves, looking at where we've created blind spots in the practice of law, and then how that shapes the society we're in, and then also being able to serve the clients with whom we work in a way that's dignified and empowering.
Is that center then focused on giving services to lawyers to help them with their performance and well-being?
Absolutely. All of the above. Yeah, that as well. Yeah. And I think it'll probably broaden as well to serve the people around lawyers as well. Because, lawyers are a small part of the judicial system or justice system.
Yeah. I think a lot of law firm partners, I hope there are some partners in traditional law firms who are listening to this and who partake in some of the services or trainings or workshops that you do. Because when you said the words, law firm management is control based, pace setting based, without any real emotional intelligence, and that leads to burnout. I bet most lawyers who have worked in law firms probably are like, yep, I know that management style.
Yeah. I mean, what if we're just looking at emotionally intelligent leadership literature, then having a vision is one of the most important things, and not just a vision of, a group of individuals having their own visions, but having a collective vision for the intended outcome of the enterprise. And I think idealism is really beaten out of lawyers very quickly for a number of reasons that would be worthy of discussion themselves, but would take us kind of on a bit of a tangent. But I think what I would like to see is people who are in law being able to see or perhaps embody a deeper sense of meaning and values in the way they practice, rather than feel like it needs to be two separate things. So, moving away from that sort of pace setting and command and control and toward something where there's a vision for a collective coming together and then working together as a group of lawyers to realize that vision is a much kinder way to be.
And there has to be integrity with it? Because you worked at, I think it led to the burnout, but it's like you didn't give any meaning to the vision statement because there was no meaning behind it. It was just words.
Yeah, I mean, and that is precisely why what we're looking at with performance is sustainable performance.
Yeah.
So, there's a difference between climbing a mountain and learning to live at altitude, right? And so the skills that people gain by cultivating excellence aren't necessarily the skills that are going to translate to running a firm or managing a group of people and being able to keep that firm performing and the individuals in it at a high level for the long haul. So there needs to be a very deliberate upskilling. And you've spoken of integrity. Absolutely. And I think, integrity is one of those values that if people embody them, in my experience, when I've embodied integrity and sort of cultivated that as a virtue or value, the quality of my relationships improved everywhere, not just at work.
Yeah.
So this is where I think also a lot of the dialogue that we have creates this arbitrary categorization of, humans as a lawyer, like as in a lawyer is a person first, but as a label, it's a very easy label to identify with and put myself into.
Yeah.
But really what I do in one domain of life ripples out and influences all the others. For example, you needing to answer those calls at 7 a.m. or by 7:10 has an impact on your relationships or your family or those close to you. And that again would undermine some of the well-being, and the nourishment that someone gets by being in a healthy, loving environment, to say nothing of what it is to be working all the time as well. So yeah, all of these things kind of are alive in, as I said, the difference between climbing a mountain and acclimatizing to living at altitude.
To live on altitude. That is a nice analogy. Before we move on to something else, can you tell me about some of you gave me the reason of the why for the project or for the center. What are some of the services that is it already open and operating, or is it something that you're in the process of creating?
It's being created now. The IP is fairly well advanced, and things are rolling. It'll be released sort of by year's end. Comfortably. The LLC is registered. Yeah.
Okay.
The what is our courses, really online courses. There will be events, but I think in COVID it's difficult. The other thing that's really necessary, it's choosing to be a therapist as opposed to working in the medical model means that it's a different business model. My job is to work with people as little as possible and have them go out into the world rather than create a client that is dependent on me for forever and ever and ever, and that will give me an income stream. So there's a different, more scary business model, and it's the same kind of model that we've got with the way we develop the IP at the Lawyers Centre. What we're looking at there is developing these courses, supporting people with coaching to upskill, and then empowering them to move on. So we work, the one-on-one work is really what embeds coursework. Otherwise, this is why I was saying, why I raised that initial point is it's really easy to produce course after course, and people can kind of get on this cycle of saying, well, as long as I'm doing courses, I'm bettering myself.
Yeah.
But the real change needs to be embodied, and that requires more support and holding. So the preference or the way we're building things is to work both in groups and run events, and also, but really I think a lot of that integration is what's key to transformation.
Very nice. And if anyone's interested in finding out more for this, is there a website, or will there be a website for this?
Yeah, there will. We don't have the domain registered yet. We've been focusing on the material, but it's coming.
Okay. And the name of it is Lawyers Center for Performance and Wellbeing?
That's right.
Okay, good. I will keep my eye out for it. It sounds like a very needed and helpful project and trainings. I want to go back into your honors thesis and your PhD work, just because it sounded very interesting to me.
Sure.
Theory of quantum mechanics and the law?
Yeah. So I looked at, and also human consciousness. So I said earlier, I'm the product of a Western education, and that means reductionism. So there were these, as I was learning law, or learning to read the law, there were these little rocks in my shoe. This doesn't seem right. This particular point of law just seems, not just inelegant, but wrong to the way that I would want to see the world if the law could be so shaped. And so then that kind of swung me through the technicality of law into the philosophy of law, and then from philosophy of law, it kind of went deeper. If you follow the what's going on here, and break things down and break things down and break things down, you end up with a pretty fundamental place, which is what is the deepest nature of the thing that the law tries to regulate, which are at a physical object level, and that is quantum mechanics. And if you were to look, what's the thing doing the perceiving? It's human consciousness. And so, my view on this is that at core, I would gravitate more towards natural law. And in that, I mean that by looking at nature and spending time and using our capacity as a human to reason, we actually can work out what is right and what is wrong. Not just by looking at the consequences of actions, but there are certain things that we can do. And even the ecological crisis comes from acting in ways that are disconnected from nature at a really fundamental level. So to me, the idea of, one of the purposes of law, good law, is that it looks beyond the appearance to get to the essence.
It looks beyond the appearance to get to the essence.
Get to the essence. So we have a trial because it may look like someone's run out of a building covered in blood, and it may look like, well, they've murdered someone. But we actually have a trial and we work out what's going on to the best of our ability. And it turns out, no, this person was trying to help them, before they died. Or before the government will produce legislation, they'll ask for submissions, recognizing that, hey, we don't know everything about this, this topic. There are specialists who do. So, on that basis, I would go with the statement that, good law does look at the essence of what is. And this is where the quantum mechanics and human consciousness kind of come in, because the deepest insight into the nature of objects that we have is quantum mechanics. And the thing that's doing the looking is a human being and human consciousness. I think in the way that we shape the fabric of law, it would behoove us to at least integrate as much as possible, or to whatever extent is appropriate, the deeper nature of what is, as we understand it now.
How are some ways that we can do that, to do that integration of what is and to bring it all together?
Well, it's paradigmatic. So, it's, and by extension, what that means is, I think, for example, the presumption of dominion over nature.
Okay.
So, the fact that we can own, or the way that we construct ownership over land or over resources, presumes human dominion.
Yeah.
If we go with a quantum mechanical level, then we would say, we go down to that level, we see, physical reality kind of breaks down, and it's better described as a field with nodes in it. So at one level of reality that we can understand, or at least have some insight into, we're all one stuff. There's an equivalent, and for me that then would come up as, we have an equivalent right to exist at that deeper level of reality. And so if we just factor that in as a core value, knowing that it's actually supported by the theoretical mathematics and physics that underpin quantum mechanics, then I think it can give us a way of engaging in the calculus of how rights come into conflict. If we begin with an equivalent right to exist for all things, we may still choose to use resources, we may still choose to cut down trees, but on the basis that it's a bit better thought through, I think is good.
And in the theory that everything is we all have the right to exist. It means, I'm taking it to mean, and I guess I'm saying this out loud as confirmation, if I'm understanding this, all people have the right to exist. Trees, animals, the planet has right to exist. Everything has the equivalent right to exist. Is it extended out or expanded out across all nature like that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think when I was more radical in my thinking, I felt I would have aligned with the idea that this needs to be more concrete, and it needs to be treated with just greater vigor, as opposed to now what I think, if decision makers are aware that this paradigm exists and that it is robust, then let them shape how they discharge their duties. If a judge is aware of this is a reasonable paradigm to look at things, how does that shape the way he or she discharges their duties, and kind of let humanity metabolize this and integrate it and move on, would be my ideal hope.
So once we're aware of this, and I'm trying to think in the practical sense, if we're aware of this, even if we don't, being aware of this in and of itself could open the door to more possibilities to achieve it, to solve it, and to handle whatever task, problem that you're dealing with at the time. If that's at your base at the beginning. And I guess where I'm hearing I think I hear what you're saying, and I find it a little bit freeing in the sense that it seems like such a important foundational awareness to have. And then if I think, okay, it's so important that in every action that I do, I need to make sure that I'm living up to it, perfectly, or that I'm not conflicting with it, right? That I'm honoring it. That could be kind of stressful. Or for me, I could see that's a high burden. It can feel like a high burden. And so knowing that just by having the awareness and maybe taking a breath and just relaxing, that awareness itself, maybe I don't have to force the rest of the way to honor it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a pathology now that's crept into the lexicon of therapy or psychology, called eco-anxiety. So there's a fun, it's having a really marked effect on the well-being of humanity to live in a way that's unsustainable. The idea of a business concept of infinite growth in a finite ecosystem is literally insane. So it's about really having a robust foundation, and what I mean by robust is the theory that I explored put forward in my thesis was to really try and shift at a deeper level the dialogue. The old, and it seems perhaps a bit arbitrary or latent in discussion, but positivism versus natural law, and how humans have kind of split something that could ostensibly be seen as sort of more faith-based, which is natural law, looking at the soul. Sorry, go ahead.
So is natural law faith-based? Explain the positivism in natural law to me.
Yeah, well, natural law in Western legal, Western jurisprudential thinking goes back to ancient Greece, looking at the rights of nature. From there, it developed an ecclesiastical line as well with Christianity and the concept of a soul, and looking at, for example, the notion of inalienable rights is attributed to certain things that humans can't take away from one another. Certain core principles, and these are essentially were treated as though they're either spiritual or religious, a religious standpoint, as opposed to legal positivism, which is really focuses on empiricism and being able to determine, looks at the outcomes of actions that are measurable and says, this is how we determine, whether we're going to do something. Greatest good for the greatest number, essentially, is going to be a justifiable thing. Now, with what's been uncovered.
I'm sorry. Already, if you're doing the greatest good for the greatest number, that kind of implies some people are going to get missed out. And the people who get missed out in that, their equivalent right to coexist just got overlooked or missed.
Yeah, well, it's neither overlooked nor missed. It's that there's a calculus that's made that says that you're on the wrong side. Greatest good for the greatest number. We do it's consciously done.
Yeah.
It doesn't randomly happen. And the idea behind that was there's certainty. If I can count, I'm going to benefit 1,000 people with this and harm 10 people. Well, I know that, and so there's a measure of certainty that's in that, as opposed to any reference to some innate quality that some people may feel, but it's not measurable, or it can't really be quantified. And I think the reason why I looked to quantum mechanics, and I gravitated to a particular interpretation of it, which is holistic in nature, is that no longer, the idea of saying, oh, we're all connected, or we're all one, and we have this equivalent right. We come from this place where there's an equivalent right to exist, because we are all the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not someone having a crack at it. It's not coming from someone saying, oh, this is just what I believe on the basis of revelation. It's saying, no, we can actually construct our paradigm of thinking on what really the cutting edge insights into science and the deepest level, at the deepest layers, upon which we know this level of reality that we inhabit is built. So it's not that it's somewhere else. And being able to say, okay, well, now if we start to think like that, it aligns with theoretical science and maths, the best insight we have into what is, and it would produce a more just and livable society, in my judgment.
But as you're talking, and I'm thinking about how leaders, whether business or community leaders, or lawyers and law firms, individuals in their lives, how they can not adopt this or live this in their lives. And it made me think of, there's the corporations, like the certified B corporations, the benefit corporations, seem like they're part of their foundation is understanding that we are connected and have an impact on our community. But anyway, so the B corporations sound like it's a step in the right direction for corporations in the capitalist module, where, like you said, to think that we have infinite resources and infinite ways to exploit things in a finite world is silly. So
yeah, well, so to bring this to the practice of law, and lawyers in particular, the ultimate currency in life is not happiness or money; it's meaning. And I think this is a mature, psychologically mature way to approach life.
Can you say
Um,
that again? It's can you say that one more time?
yeah, the ultimate currency for a well-lived life, in my judgment, is meaning, not
Yeah.
happiness. Because the pursuit of happiness is inherently one half of a polarity. Like, it's unrealistic to think I'm going to be happy every day. And if I kind of have that expectation, it's going to distort my value set completely, as opposed to what is it that's truly meaningful to me? And am I living my life congruently with that, or with those values? And so, it's this is why I'm saying to you, the one-on-one work is really important to help people both get clarity on what is truly meaningful to them, and then work out how to express themselves and form relationship in a way that enlivens whatever it is that is meaningful powerfully.
Yeah. I was reading your LinkedIn profile earlier, and one of the things, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is one of the areas I wanted to ask for more information. I think that everyone has had the expression of their brilliance dimmed by life experiences, and the experience impact every domain of a person's life, from how they express themselves to productivity to their personal and professional. And one of the things that you'd like to do is integrate these experiences so someone can live an unencumbered and empowered and purposeful life, I think, and live out their purpose. And so that just seems so vitally important to me. And I've been in some personal development retreats, and I have gone through phases in my life too, where you have people like, oh, yay, people like they know what their purpose is. And then once they know what their purpose is, they have a sense of direction. And there have been times where I've been like, well, that's great, but I don't know what my purpose is. So, and I find that the times where I felt like I didn't know what my purpose was are the times that I felt depressed, frustrated, angry. And so when you were saying how you help people find the clarity in that, what are some things that you do or suggestions you have for people who have trouble
Well, yeah.
identifying their purpose and meaning?
Well, the first thing, well, it depends on where they're at in their relationship to themselves.
Yeah.
There's a spectrum of possibility here. So when I was teaching, I found there are lots of lawyer jokes out in the world,
Mm.
many lawyer jokes. But whenever someone's child or partner gets into law school, the family celebrates.
Yeah.
It's a it's a high pressure job with high status, and I think becoming a lawyer is seen often by people in the practice as the end in itself, or that this is kind of what they're hoping to achieve. Um, I referred earlier to the disillusionment that happens throughout the practice of law, beginning with legal education and the way that that's run. Um, the dissonance between high IQ and relatively low EQ, what that does internally. So I think in terms of helping lawyers to find purpose, um, first it's understanding where they're at on that journey within themselves. How fulfilled are they in what they're doing? What does it cost them to be where they're at? Then, I think moving on from that, and I said this earlier, trauma is a word that covers a fairly wide field. To be trauma informed, it's very useful, but when you really get into the nature of it, and this is why I'm saying, part of the part of my purpose is to support people to uncover their traumas, not just cognitively understand. Because this is the other piece. I can try and run a course to say, oh, you can become trauma informed, but the truth is, unless you've touched and really inhabited and worked through, metabolized and integrated your own trauma personally,
Yeah.
you're not really going to know how to handle someone in that. It's a cognitive exercise, and that's not where people are troubled. That's not the root of the problem. And so that would be about management rather than actually creating an outcome that's truly beneficial. So why I say this in answer to the question that you asked is that most people have quite a lot of trauma. It's actually necessary to become a human being. And people mistakenly believe that their trauma responses are their personality.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, so and so is low emotional intelligence, can be unlearned. So I think the thing that really helps people find their purpose is to first, if you think of like the inner ecology needs to be weeded, and then once it's weeded, you can see what it is that wishes to be sown, or wants to grow into that space. So, and it's the movement between the two. So part of it is working on what was to integrate the disintegrated experiences and the experiences after which I wasn't the same, or whatever it is that people have gone through that have made them where arrived them in adulthood. So part of the process is that, and then the next part is doing some work to listen to what actually is really important to the person. And there's many people who offer products and programs and so on to do that. And I've got my own sort of way of doing these things, but in essence, it's that, and it's moving between them. Where have I been? Where do I want to go? And then finding, the present is in between those two.
And in the process, what I found for myself, which was a shift with myself, is being honest with myself and then having the courage to make a change. Like for me, it was leaving the practice of law. And like you, very early on, even when I was in law school, like I was still in law school. I remember like in contracts class, I remember thinking like half of these, in our case law book, I'm like, so many of these disputes just seem like not just petty, but like how the law resolved them and all this. I just couldn't. I just remember being frustrated in class over how it was being handled. So that should have been a clue. But then what you were saying, you get so driven for the purpose, what I thought was the purpose or the goal, that I stopped asking the question, is this what I really want? It was to achieve the goal. And then you start practicing the law, and it's like, okay, I'm here. I need to become the best lawyer that I can be. So that was the new goal. And then finally, when I felt like, you get your head out of water, all of a sudden I was like, I don't like this. I don't think I ever, and I felt, it sounds so extreme now, but this is what I felt at the time. I'm like, it's sucking the life out of me. And
Hmm.
it still took about 2 to 3 years after that and some other losses and things in the personal life that finally got me to say, "You know what? I need to take a pause from everything and just kind of figure out what it is, who I am, what it is that I want." And it was during that pause that I felt connected to a purpose. So,
Hmm.
um,
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things there. So, I mean, I realized that I didn't really give a definition of trauma.
oh,
And what I will say is that rather than defining it, because I think that up to to an extent, it's useful for professionals in the field to know what it is. But for everyone else in the world, trauma is known by its symptoms.
mm,
And so it's anxiety, it's depression, it can be substance abuse, it can be overwork, it can be emotionally disconnected, it can be um, there's a culture in law of going and drinking a lot. I think that's one of the reasons why they call it the bar.
yeah.
Um,
Mm,
uh, so there's ways that people use to either manage their stress, as being
mhm,
on a stress and release cycle. It's actually, I'm in the process. More than halfway through. I'm writing a book for people who are addicted to achievement, and yeah, most of
mm,
the case studies that I've used are actually lawyers with with the
yeah.
clients with whom I've worked. And it's because, again, overachievement is celebrated. Overwork is celebrated in a lot of places, but it's unsustainable. And the people who, are people know at a very deep level that something's not right within themselves. And why, again, support is so important. Like I heard you say, you know, you needed to admit this to yourself, what was going on. The first step is so difficult because to really grow and progress, I need to become aware of something I wasn't aware of. And they're the choices that I've been making automatically or unconsciously. And the process of working one's way to uncovering those choices, the hidden choices that I've been making that I didn't know I was making, is the first step to being able to change them. But the signs of those choices are there, which is I'm not satisfied, I'm not happy, I'm anxious, um, I'm not I'm not living a meaningful life. I don't, as you said, something's not right. So this is something. It's a stage that a lot of people actually can use support in recognizing that. I've got really high achievers that come in. I've got a chief of staff for one of the major political parties that I work with in Australia, and they came in wound so tight, and they've learned how to see. The other point that I'll make very quickly as well is that one of the signs of trauma is often that people start to spend less time kind of aware of their bodies and more time in their head,
Yeah.
so they can think, or they tend to think fast. There are some people who learn to channel that dysregulation and fast thinking, the anxiety, into work because it's productive and has a payoff. And that then sets up a cycle where um, not only have I normalized now my trauma and dysregulation, but I've now hung my hat on it for my sense of achievement. And it gives me a lot of other benefits in my life, including my livelihood. And so disentangling this so that people can gently come back to themselves without facing the existential terror of, well, I've built my whole edifice, personality, and professional life on being a functional, high functioning anxiety,
Yeah.
um, and supporting them to come back and realize that they will always have the tools and the benefits that they've learned, but their lifestyle may need to change, or maybe they're going to change where they're working or how they work. But it's not necessarily any one thing. I've got some people who go on this journey and need to change careers fundamentally, and some people are able to do exactly what they've been doing but differently. Um, and so it's very difficult to say where that will go for any one
Yeah.
individual before. Yeah, but it begins with becoming aware of the choices I didn't even know I was making.
Mhm. and listening or seeing those signs, like you said, the anxiety or the short-temperedness or whatever, however it can manifest, it can show up in different people in different ways.
That's exactly right.
So I want to be mindful of our time, and I do want to ask a few more things.
Okay.
Kim told me not to let you off the phone until I talked about your men's work and DJ gigs.
Okay, sure. What do you want to know about those?
Well, tell me, what is your men's work? What is it that you do?
So I'm involved with the Mankind Project. I held an international leadership role there. That's a men's organization that runs rites of passages or a rite of passage weekend retreat for men. And really, I think in any given week, there's about 1,000 circles running all over the world under the banner of the Mankind Project. So it's just a place where men can come. Some men come to explore themselves and learn themselves more. Some men come because their life is on fire and they need support. And it's a safe space for men to re-examine what it is to move towards a conscious or healthy masculine in a supportive environment, is what it comes down to.
That is very good. I was just reading, not reading, I was listening to something the other day. It was in the context, I think it was in the context of the Me Too movement and sexual harassment for like women. But in the conversation, the person was saying, we have this conversation, we're talking all about the women, but there's also needs to be a conversation about how that trickles down into how they develop, or the role or the interaction between people. And so it seems like, I think that the point of this person was making a lot more eloquently than I'm making right now is so much of this focus have been on the women's experience with it, which is an important, but we also have to look at men's experience in it too. And I think so having, again, the timing of this, our conversation where you're talking about this, I wasn't aware of this Mankind Project. It seems like it's a very needed project.
Oh yeah. It does good work.
Yeah.
I guess I've had the benefit of facilitating and running men's circles in a number of countries. And what's been really useful or a real gift to me getting to do that is to see men and masculinity beyond culture, and kind of see what is it that's similar with these people in different contexts, in radically different contexts. Definitely there's a part, I would call that, old paradigm of men not feeling their emotions, toxic masculinity. And it's also, so blatantly paradoxical from the outset because, which is more courageous, to actually be honest and truthful or to lie about your feelings? It's kind of a no-brainer.
Is that something that you have seen in the different cultures across the world? Is that one of those similarities you have seen?
Well, yeah, I'd say there is an element, but so I think at core the journey for both men and women is to become self-responsible, to understand the difference between my intention and the impact that I have when I do things. So I might have one intention to show up a particular way, but what ends up happening is I have a different impact. And learning how to find the strength and humility to take responsibility for my impact. And so when I think, when you're talking about the Me Too movement, a lot of the work I do with men in the context of men's work is definitely supporting them to get in touch with their emotional life and their inner, and in so doing cultivate inner resources. But it's also to understand the impact that they've had while they've been disconnected, and to learn how to serve the impact in a way that actually allows them to express more of their essence, which is generally, they're caring and compassionate and just as emotional as women. I think this is just emotional life is something that comes with being a Homo sapien. Creating an environment where that's safe is important. I've also, I've got my finger in a number of pies. Like I also have a partner in a emotional intelligence company here in Australia where we do work in organizations. And one of the places that we worked was a pilot training school. And the culture was so toxically masculine. The female employees would have the men put their dirty dishes on the table of the female employee so that she would have to do the washing up. And she wasn't without rank. This was not it was unbelievable
Oh my goodness.
to go in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty horrific. And working for a few days to really see what actually drives that behavior is trauma, and getting those men to actually touch it. And again, they knew it. Like the one or two people that were really responsible for the culture at Root, they knew they were traumatized.
Yeah.
They knew they carried pain, but had no idea what to do with it, or that it even was something that could be dealt with. So, I think in terms of the Me Too movement, abusers or, people who are abused abuse. I think, power gets abused, culturally often by men. And I'm not man hating at all. I do conscious men's work. I think that it's really deep. It's a deep value of mine. But supporting men to actually connect with themselves more, not generally, always in my experience, brings out a kinder, more well-rounded man who is actually better able to hold boundaries and express them more kindly rather than from anger or disconnect or whatever it may be.
If someone is a whole person, I guess this was I'm thinking of, is power always corrupt? Does power always lead to an aggressor? If someone is a whole person integrated with themselves and have that sense of the equivalent, we all have an equivalent right to exist and our connection with everyone, can that person use power for good, or do you even need power at that level?
Yeah, well, look, power is an inescapable aspect of our existence.
Yeah.
Where there's people, there's power. Power is like oxygen.
Mm.
You only realize you know when you don't have it, right? Otherwise, when you've got power, it's absolutely invisible and is taken for granted. The paradigmatic shift is from a power over culture to a consent based or power with culture. And this is, I've got some online courses where I teach people this stuff. It's about choosing to move toward consent rather than dominion. Okay. And creating a space. And it requires a real shift in how I communicate, in going beyond some of the more superficial relationary dynamics that people that are ubiquitous in culture, and I mean, this is something that's pretty much across cultures, and going underneath that. So a really good example of one of these sort of ubiquitous codependent paradigms is called the drama triangle, that was developed by a man called Stephen Karpman, to actually get underneath that and work out how to move from a place of essence. Oops, have you got a question there?
Is that the triangle, like victim, persecutor, rescuer?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
So
okay.
I mean, that's an example of a codependent dynamic that is ubiquitous. To go underneath that and actually begin to express my real needs and to do it in a way that's non-violent and is actually spoken with an intention to connect and affirm life.
Yeah.
Because good boundaries create freedom. It's paradoxical. People think the other way.
Good boundaries create freedom.
Yes.
Yes, I get that.
Because to not set a boundary is to choose to build long-term resentment over the short-term discomfort of a difficult conversation. Yeah. And so bringing this back to your question, to explore, well, power is an aspect of life. To use it gracefully to serve, the unfolding present in a way that's resonant and meaningful is, the project of all the different enterprises that I'm driving and a part of. So definitely with lawyers and what we're doing to make systemic change individually. I do that work in my private practice, and through my company, Primal Intelligence, we do that in organizations.
How do you keep track of all the different things you have going on?
I've never thought of it.
Okay.
Truthfully, I think I work with amazing people everywhere. You
Uh-huh.
know, I said it, before. There's a web of support around me. I've got an amazing partner. I've got a loving family. I've got, my partners in business are all, self-responsible, psychologically mature people, and we share a vision.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that just allows me to be who I am and just find a context to be me.
Yeah, find a context to be you. And the art of, I don't know why I'm coming, the art of collaboration, like you said, with your partnerships and things, not feeling like you have to do everything yourself and all the things that you are involved in, but it's being part of a
Yes.
team with those different projects. 5 minutes. So I'll do 3 questions in 5 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, the last
Okay.
one question. You're DJing. What's your DJing?
That was me when I was doing my thesis, when I was writing my thesis. It took me almost 10 years. And I found I used to think in words. And then one day when I was trying to explore this really abstract concept, I'm reading a book on consciousness. I had this little electrical kind of short circuit in my brain, and I could start to think in pictures. And I saw these concepts link visually rather than thinking in words, which I was doing before. And then I used words to describe what I'd seen. And
Okay.
ever since then, I can think in pictures. And from that, I thought I would use a springboard to try and express myself creatively in as many different ways as I could.
Hmm.
And then the DJing just kind of fell into my lap where I actually just said to a friend, I've always liked music.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who said, who I've known since we were kids, and he had a birthday party. I think it was his 40th. And I said, "Oh, my birthday present to you is I'll DJ," because I always came and played music at his thing. But I said, "I'll DJ your party," and that was my present to him. And then from there, someone else heard I'd played there, and then I was invited to play at a festival that was run. And then 6 months later, I was signed to a label, and then I enjoyed that lifestyle. And I think, like, I play chill out or world music and sort of mid tempo kind of beats. And yeah, I was really fortunate. I got ranked in the top 10 in I think 2016 and 17, which was fun. And now I'll play a bit. I'll play a
Yeah.
bit, but I probably should play a bit more than I do. But I'm just doing so many really rich creative enterprises
Yeah.
serving, trauma and people that I don't have as much time as I used to.
So it all sounds, all of the common theme for all the different things that you seem to do is tapping into your creativity. Is you're tapping into your creativity with the DJing and now creativity for your other projects, which just to me shows the importance of creativity and
Oh,
play.
yeah. Well, play, if you look at there's a theory, I'll try and do this quickly. There's 7 primary affective circuits in mammals. Lust, rage, care, I won't list them all, but play is one of them. And play is actually centrally important to the way that we learn. So, both in terms of neuroplasticity as well as if you can make learning fun, people will actually engage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, being creative, people play music, they don't work music. So it's about just getting out there and having some fun.
Have fun with it.
Yeah.
Last question. What
hmm
does being an integrative lawyer or integrative law mean to you?
That's a good question. For me, I like the idea of uh, the whole person
Mhm.
and the whole society, the whole world being a consideration rather than being myopic. So to me, it's seeing myself and the world in context and bringing that awareness. Because to me, the thing I love about law is it's an organizing principle. Really, that's how I see it. It helps us get together as a group and determine how we're going to relate to one another, and gives us some way of organizing the chaos
Yeah.
that is us. So to me, the integrative part, as I said, is bringing as much context to wholeness and fulfillment, and actually having our society reflect that, um, not in a way that's detached from reality, but in a way that's actually really grounded and embodied.
Mhm. There's something very noble in that, as you were saying that how law is part of an how we organize society in a way, and then if we could do it in a way that realizes how we're all connected, There's something very noble in that, which beats all the lawyer jokes where the lawyers end up dead at the bottom of the sea. So it's a nice shift. So,
That's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dhall. It was very nice meeting with you, and thank you for taking the time with us today.
Thank you very much.